Namaskar and welcome to India First. Tonight we'll set in context the state visit to India of the Indonesian President Joko Widodo. After wide-ranging talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the two countries signed 3 agreements: an MOU on youth and sports cooperation, an MOU on standardization cooperation, and a joint communique on voluntary international cooperation to combat illegal, unregulated and unreported fishing and to promote sustainable fisheries governance. Well, in the press statement, the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, highlighted the importance of maritime cooperation between the two maritime neighbors. Andaman and Nicobar Islands shares a maritime border with Indonesia along the Andaman Sea.
We agreed to prioritize defense and security cooperation. Two important maritime nations that are also neighbors, we agreed to cooperate to ensure the safety and security of the sea lanes in disaster response and environmental protection. The joint statement on maritime cooperation outlines the agenda of our engagement in this field.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi also acknowledged that the visit adds new intensity to strategic engagement.
We live in a geography that is at the center of our rapid political, economic and strategic challenges currently underway in the world. Your visit allowed us to impart vigor and momentum to our strategic partnership and shape our convergences to act as a force of peace, prosperity and stability in the Indo-Pacific region.
The PM said that defense cooperation, combating terrorism, organized crime and human trafficking are high on the agenda.
Our partnership will also extend to combating terrorism, organized crime, drugs and human trafficking. Friends, President and I also agreed to build a strong economic and development partnership that strengthens the flow of ideas, trade, capital and people between our two countries.
The Indonesian President Joko Widodo also highlighted the deepening trade and business ties between the two countries.
Indonesia wishes to increase trade. Indonesia also wishes to diversify its export products to India. We also discussed effort to increase investment cooperation. Indonesia invites India to increase investment cooperation in pharmaceutical, IT, and automotive. I welcome the signing of MOU in trade standardization, and I'm confident that it will increase trade.
And to put this important visit into context, we have with us in the studio Commodore retired C. Udaybhaskar, who is the Director for the Society for Policy Studies and a well-known security and strategic affairs expert. And we have Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, who is the Director General of the Research and Information System for Developing Countries. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. We'll start with you, Commodore Udaybhaskar. The focus is on maritime security. And how important is this? Because it was emphasized also by a separate joint statement, also the fact that the two countries are neighbors, maritime neighbors, and when we look at Indonesia, President Widodo has a maritime policy because he feels that the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, Indonesia plays a significant part. Your views?
Mark, when you say how important
Yeah.
I'm in this happy situation of saying that I can answer with one word, which is very.
Yes, absolutely.
And all 4 letters are in caps. Victor, Echo, Romeo, Yankee. Very. And I think this particular visit is particularly significant because in a way there is a certain harmonization of the political vision, both in India and in Indonesia.
Okay.
You'll recall the Modi government has now roughly crossed its halfway mark.
Right.
And in the last 2 years plus, Prime Minister Modi has also drawn attention to the maritime domain, both for defense and development. And I'm sure Sachin will fill in the blanks on that, but connectivity issues, ports, etc., etc. But I was very gratified to see the way in which both the leaders, Prime Minister Modi, in his remarks, emphasized the maritime dimension and the scope for cooperation across the board. He referred to the security of the sea lines of communication. Both India and Indonesia have a shared interest. He spoke about humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. And we are speaking about that on a day when the east coast of India, Tamil Nadu and Andhra, are dealing with a cyclone.
Yes.
Again, a very serious, real issue for both countries, for all the countries in the region. And I was quite struck by 2 other references in Prime Minister Modi's remarks. One is, he spoke about the need for both countries to pool their resources for environmental protection.
Right.
And I think the health of the ocean, the Indian Ocean in particular, is an issue that is not receiving the kind of focused professional interest it needs. And I hope what has been said today would be taken forward by both countries, because the health of the ocean is critical for the entire southern Asian region, including the monsoon.
Right.
And the last phrase, which has strategic salience, if I may, is Prime Minister Modi's reference to the Indo-Pacific, which goes back to the point you were making, that even Indonesia sees itself as in a very critical geography that links both the oceans, the Pacific and the Indian. So what is it that the 2 countries can do? And President Joko, in his own way, also has been talking about the need for Indonesia to realize its own maritime potential. So that's what I mean by the harmonization at the highest political levels in both countries.
Dr. Chaturvedi, President Widodo, when he came to power, also spoke about, improving fisheries. Fisheries is extremely important for them. And the fact is that a lot of the boats that ply around in those waters are apparently illegally plying there, stealing the fish in a sense, and he says about 95% of that happens. Now, maritime security in that context also is extremely important, isn't it?
That is absolutely right, Mark. The fact that Prime Minister Modi has initiated this idea of blue economy, where Indian Ocean rim countries can collaborate together, work towards it, is extremely important. I'm extremely glad that today they have signed this agreement, which would provide a major boost to infrastructure development within the IORA for fisheries sector. There is a huge concern in terms of how, as you rightly pointed out, vessels are coming in from other countries who have nothing to do except crossing the Indian Ocean waters, are doing not only illegal fishing but also illegal mining. And I'm sure next step, when Prime Minister Modi in early part of the next year is in Indonesia in March, for the IORA summit, there would be a greater understanding on checking the illegal mining. So I think it's extremely important from that point of view.
Comrade Udaybhaskar, how important, I keep saying how important, and you will say very important, but the point is that, if you have to keep, there was an emphasis on direct flights and also direct shipping lines. How important is direct shipping lines? Because, when there is some doubt as to these sea lanes, and when there are direct shipping lines that keep on going up and down, does that emphasize a sort of, that there has to be international law prevailing?
I'll consciously not use the word very, but say that it is highly important.
Okay.
Meaning that I think one of the things, Mark, is that India and Indonesia actually have not even scratched the surface in terms of the potential between the 2 countries for their engagement across a range of issues. There is politics, there's trade, diplomacy, development, and I think this entire maritime domain. And I think in the point that you're making about the lack of connectivity, the fact that we are now talking about this 25 years after the end of the Cold War. 1991 is when the Cold War ends. It's in 2016 that India and Indonesia are now really talking about basic issues like connectivity. But as always, I think, it's better late than never. And the reason why I constantly emphasize the need for us to recognize the salience of Indonesia is that not only is it the largest country within the ASEAN framework, it also is a country with a very, very distinctive pedigree in terms of its maritime character. If you look at the spread of Indonesia, it is the largest archipelagic island state in the world. Secondly, and I think this is where the politics and I think the relationship has to be seen in a wider context, it is the largest Muslim nation in the world.
True.
So it has a certain profile, even as far as, I would say, the political context of Asia at a time when there are various kinds of churnings that are going on.
Sure. No, but the question I was actually trying to ask is that, there is an atmosphere of conflict in the region as far as the sea lanes are concerned.
Sure.
And President Widodo is keen on sorting all this out through dialogue and, establishing some sort of of high-level maritime security with a nation like India is going to help him in this manner, especially to try and when there are ships moving up and down.
May I just place this in context and say that when we talk about the sea lines of communication, at one level I would say that all the major powers are agreed, the major trading nations, that issues like piracy need to be dealt with very swiftly, and we have seen that happening from 2008 onwards. The problem that President Joko is referring to is within the ASEAN region, where there has been a certain amount of what is perceived as transgression. Many of the ASEAN countries make the same kind of observation, that their waters are being illegally poached by external agencies. Some of them are within the region, some are part of globalization. And this has been repeatedly coming up in ASEAN, and I think India as outside of ASEAN can perhaps share its own experience, particularly in areas like maritime domain awareness, MDA as it's called, which is one of President Modi's pet advocacies as far as the maritime domain is concerned, saying that by using technology, he is a great proponent of Sagar, Prime Minister Modi, which is security and growth for all in the region. And I think specific to Indonesia, the kind of underlining that the Indonesian president has done about the fisheries issue is actually a win-win for all countries, meaning that if you can husband the fish stock in the appropriate way and arrive at protocols, which has incidentally been done by the European nations when we look at what is happening in Europe. So I think we have a precedent, and I think the political sort of will is there to take this forward.
Right. We're going to take a short commercial break at this point in time, but when we come back, we'll move into the economic aspects of this relationship. Do stay with us. You're watching India First.
रिक्शा में जाने के लिए या दफ्तर से आने के लिए, पढ़ने लिखने के लिए या सेल्फ रिस्पेक्ट से जीने के लिए, कपड़े खरीदने के लिए या फसल बेचने के लिए, बिजली के बिल के लिए या भिंडी पनीर के लिए, कोई भी भुगतान बिना नकद के करना बिल्कुल मुमकिन है इन 5 तरीकों से। स्मार्टफोन में या तो यूपीआई ऐप डाउनलोड करो या रख लो ई-वॉलेट। बिना इंटरनेट वाला साधारण फोन हो तो डायल करो *99#। कुछ नहीं तो डेबिट कार्ड जेब में रख लो यार, या तो आधार कार्ड से भी कर लो तुरंत भुगतान। इतना करते ही बन जाएगा आपका मोबाइल या कार्ड, आपका बैंक भी, बटुआ भी।
मेरे प्यारे देशवासियों, आज से ही संकल्प लीजिए कि आप स्वयं कैशलेस सोसाइटी के लिए खुद एक हिस्सा बनेंगे। देश को भ्रष्टाचार मुक्त करने का अभियान, लोगों को कठिनाइयों समस्याओं से मुक्त करने का अभियान, इसका नेतृत्व करना है आपको।
बिल्कुल मुमकिन है।
बचपन से ही मुझे पता था आई वॉज अ बॉर्न लीडर, और इस बात का एहसास दिलाया मेरी पहली जॉब ने। वो सब सिखाया जो कोई और नौकरी नहीं सिखा सकती। मैन मैनेजमेंट, टाइम मैनेजमेंट, क्राइसिस मैनेजमेंट, सब कुछ। पहले ही दिन से मैं टीम को लीड कर रहा था, और जितने साल मैंने बिताए उससे कई ज्यादा एक्सपीरियंस मिला मुझे। और सबसे अच्छी बात, माय फर्स्ट जॉब मेड माय सेकंड करियर पॉसिबल।
हम है भारत के सबसे एक्साइटिंग वर्कप्लेस और हम दे रहे हैं आपको एक ऑफर। भारतीय सेना, आम नहीं ये जिंदगी।
क्या भाई साहब, कहाँ बिजी हैं?
बस यार, अभी अभी मैंने अपना एडवांस टैक्स ई-पे किया है।
तब तो भाई साहब बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। देश की सीमाओं को सुरक्षित रखने के लिए।
मैंने क्या किया? सीमाओं की सुरक्षा के लिए तो हमारे ये वीर जवान तैनात हैं।
पर ये तभी संभव है क्योंकि आप जैसे जिम्मेदार लोग एडवांस टैक्स के रूप में समय पर अपना योगदान दे रहे हैं और इसके लिए मैं आपको सैल्यूट करता हूँ।
आप भी अपनी जिम्मेदारी निभाएं, सही समय पर सही एडवांस टैक्स जमा करवाएं। एडवांस टैक्स की तीसरी किस्त जमा करने की अंतिम तारीख है 15 दिसंबर 2016।
आयकर विभाग द्वारा जनहित में जारी।
Welcome back, and let's continue our discussion on the state visit of the Indonesian president to India. And let's turn to Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi now. In terms of bilateral trade, of course, they're looking to ramp it up, but currently there's a trade surplus which is with Indonesia. Not much that Indonesia is importing from India, but Indonesia is looking for big investments from India in terms of infrastructure, especially in terms of toll roads, power plants, ports, airports. Is India, willing to invest?
Definitely, Mark. There is a clear interest, and our textile sector has been pouring in money there, along with the automobile industry and, of course, IT industry.
Pharmaceuticals as well.
Today we heard the President mentioning pharmaceutical as well. Somewhere close to $15 billion have already been invested by our firms. The trade which we are expecting to go up, and idea is that by 2020 we touch the $25 billion mark. Actually, if you see in 2014 we had already reached up to $19 billion, and then we see a sudden decline with Indonesia blocking export of coal and bringing it down to something like $14 billion now. So that we would have to see, and of course with bilateral discussions, that embargo would be soon over and we would be able to import. Not that we require much, as you know from the government's own strategy. We are trying to switch over from coal-based growth process to other alternative sources. But definitely there are opportunities of India and Indonesia working together in terms of what is called as value chains, and there are specific sectors, particularly in fishing, as the agreement has already been signed today. There are possibilities of we getting into processing of fishes which are being collected by companies and fishermen across the two borders. So there are opportunities for investment in that sector as well.
Would we see the fact that there is cooperation now in standardization? Would there be a problem with standards earlier? Could one ask that question? That groups have to work now to reach some levels of standards that can help trade develop.
Actually, India ASEAN FTA already had a group which was working on sanitary and phytosanitary measures and technical barriers to trade, both SPS TBT measures with ASEAN countries. Indonesia is also part of that. This would have to be further given a boost in terms of we addressing all NTMs that we are facing with, not just with Indonesia but with other ASEAN countries as well. As you know, ASEAN, where Indonesia is located, is a very coherent group in which a lot of standards are already common to them, and they have signed several MRAs among themselves to arrive at minimum level where they can trade with other partner countries. So from that point of view, definitely India and Indonesia partnership would also facilitate India's connect with the rest of the ASEAN countries.
So what does standardization actually do? So to help our viewers understand, because let's say, does it help in maximizing interoperability, helping goods and services to move more easily, things like that?
Yeah, there are two kinds of compatibility. Compatibility, you rightly said, is a major thrust of this process, in which you are trying to address the challenges that firms face when they export products from here, and particularly the edible products. You find them below standard, below necessary treatment being done to that. So they then arrive on prior set standards. When you are exporting, then you try to see that your firms abide by those standards. So how do you evolve that framework where both the countries a priori agree with the kind of standards they expect the product products to have. And from that point of view, there are issues related to rules of origin, but there are issues which are related to specific standards to be maintained by exporters, forms, so that you export quality products which are being perceived there as safe and sound in terms of imports.
Commodore Udaybhaskar, in terms of defense cooperation, which is high on the agenda, is there a possibility of, joint production with a country like Indonesia?
It would be highly desirable, Mark, but I'm afraid the reality is that until India is able to acquire a certain benchmark, we may not be able to offer very much at the manufacturing level. Meaning, hypothetically, like Indonesia, not hypothetically, it's a reality, is a maritime focused state.
Right.
So therefore, you want to produce or provide to them a range of equipment that is relevant to the Navy and the Coast Guard. For instance, small ships, fast attack craft, or OPVs and things of this nature. But the reality is that today India does not offer an option that a country like Indonesia would look at, both in terms of cost, time deliveries, and the quality of production, which is where I think the standardization issue also comes up. But I think India should look at other niches where we have a certain USP or a strength.
Okay.
And I would say space and technology related to surveillance in the maritime domain is something that India could bring to the table in a consensual way, because surveillance is a very sensitive subject, for any country in a bilateral kind of mode. But because we are talking about issues where the challenge is really, I think, common to all. For instance, piracy, illegal fishing, terrorism, all flagged by Prime Minister Modi and his Indonesian, the president who's visiting as President Joko. I think if India can bring these to the table, then the ulterior motive that I as an analyst see there from the Indian side is, you are then able to spread this within ASEAN. Meaning, India's focus as in the maritime domain is, we are a net security provider.
Right.
That's how we envision ourselves.
Okay.
So I would say make progress in areas where you have a strength. Till such time as your shipyards are able to come up to global standards, which are set by countries like South Korea and Japan.
Let's
China,
move on into counter-terrorism as well, Commodore Udaybhaskar. I mean, obviously, Indonesia has been at the receiving end of a number of terrorist attacks, and they have a de-radicalization program there as well, because a number of their people also join IS. And how would you see this particular cooperation in terms of counter-terrorism with Indonesia?
Again, I would say that this is an area that has not been adequately, I think, recognized in our country, particularly at the level of the perception of the common people. Meaning that when we talk about terrorism, particularly the jihadi variant, which is the post-2001 experience, more often than not, our association is with West Asia. We think of Syria, we think of Iraq, and we come all the way up to Afghanistan and Pakistan. But there is a reality that there is a large footprint of similar ideology and related violence which moves into terrorism in Southeast Asia.
Sure.
Indonesia, as you rightly observed, is an affected party. So are countries like the Philippines, which have also having their own internal kind of dissonances. Malaysia. And most recently, we have seen a country like Myanmar, which has been talking about its own anxieties as far as these ideologies are concerned.
Right.
So I think the short answer is that India needs to look at this in a holistic way, because when we talk about combating terrorism, the ultimate challenge is to prevent, to preempt, which means sharing intelligence, information, best practices.
And let me pick your brains also on the drug issue, on the controlling narcotics and drug abuse, which is apparently quite high in Indonesia, and here the president is keen on cooperation in that respect.
Again, a very serious issue. I mean, fundamentalism, terrorism, small arms, narcotics, and the trafficking of women. This is a common problem across the region, and they're all interlinked. Because what they do is they undermine the state.
And we know that the Indonesians are very severe on that with the death penalty.
But look at the Philippines also, for instance, or for that matter, the protocols in Singapore. Basically, drugs and narcotics is a serious issue in Southeast Asia. Not all of them have been able to ensure the same degree of compliance. But because the problem is interlinked, I think India and Indonesia should be engaging far more robustly, perhaps below the radar, on a range of these issues.
And finally, Dr. Chaturvedi, in terms of information technology could also be an area where, you know, there could be a lot of more cooperation, and pharmaceuticals, which has been mentioned. What more can we see in terms? There has been the CEO forum that is meeting. Both leaders have encouraged them to meet more often. And what is likely to come out of something like this?
Mark, we should not forget that here is a man, President Jokovic, who is largely seen as a reformer. And he has come up with
a
some
lot of similarities with our Prime Minister.
Exactly, yeah, a lot of similarities with our Prime Minister. He has come up with what is called as porous maritime dunya, a new concept he has given in terms of connecting with neighboring countries. And like what we are facing here, demonetization, he has also attacked money laundering and black money in Indonesia. So he has renewed the amnesty scheme from 1st October till 31st December, incidentally, which is also a deadline in India. So that way, a lot of similarities you see across developing countries, but Indonesia and Indian leadership have acted in a similar fashion in terms of taking black money out of the system. And they, the IT that you mentioned probably would be excellent. He is also trying to bring in IT as a loop to capture tax evasion. And the immediate beneficiary of tax evasion from Indonesia is Singapore. Next door, where all money is
I mean, we talk about the similarities. Let me just bring in one more point that, you know, they take firm decisions. They're both determined leaders, our Prime Minister and President Widodo. And when, in fact, President Widodo had removed fuel subsidies to some extent, and that was a very unpopular decision. It was a very unpopular decision, and he said that he doesn't take decisions because of popularity. He takes decisions, you know, he doesn't seek popularity. He takes decisions because they are necessary.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's where the focus really is, and that's where his emphasis on being very reform-minded and setting up targets. He's also working overtime to bring in the Sustainable Development Goals for Indonesia. So I think that gives huge maneuvering space to the state to act.
Right. So we leave it there. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us here on India First. Well, the joint statement said that the two leaders agreed to follow up on the discussions that they had, and they will follow up in 2017 with meetings of the ministerial level joint commission. That's the Defense Ministers Dialogue, the Biennial Trade Ministers Forum, the Energy Forum, to develop a roadmap for energy cooperation and to establish the establishment of a security dialogue for comprehensive action plan on security cooperation. So it's a wide spectrum for the strategic partnership. And Prime Minister Modi has agreed to visit Indonesia at an early date at the invitation of President Widodo. Well, thanks very much for watching. You've been watching India First. Thanks for your time.